Good afternoon, everyone. I am Benjo Ato, an internal medicine and infectious disease specialist. Before I start, I would like to thank the College of Nursing from Xavier University for inviting me as one of the speakers for this event. This topic is close to my heart since during fellowship training at University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital, we experienced leptospirosis surge, especially since Manila is always flooded after heavy rainfall. We get leptospirosis cases almost the entire year, and in the recent typhoons in Mindanao, I also had leptospirosis cases here in Butuan City, here in our region in Caraga. So, to start, these are my discussion points. We will talk about first the epidemiology, the pathophysiology and organ involvement, clinical presentation, how to work up leptospirosis, the different treatment and management protocols, the complications to watch out for, and what are the role of us doctors in early detection and DOH reporting. So first, for the epidemiology, leptospirosis is a global zoonotic disease caused by the pathogenic spirochete of the genus Leptospira. So the disease is common in the tropics and subtropics, and outbreaks are frequently associated with periods of heavy rainfall and flooding. An estimated 1 million severe cases annually with case fatality ratio of nearly 10% with mortality in the poorest regions. And zooming in into the Philippines, outbreaks are often seen following heavy rainfall events due to rapid urbanization, poor infrastructure, not to mention the recent flood control scandals and ghost projects, and the resulting flooding of flood-prone areas. This year, due to the rainy season, there was a log cases of 2,396 from the month of June to August 2025. And this data is from Department of Health. So leptospirosis is primarily a disease of the wild and domesticated animals, which shed the organisms in their urine. Humans are infected through direct contact with infected urine or tissues or through indirect contact with water or soil contaminated by infected urine. So the spirochetes enter the body through cuts and abrasions on the skin, mucosal surfaces like the conjunctiva, or by inhaling droplets or aerosols containing the bacteria. Meaning, even if patients do not have wounds, visible cuts, they can still get leptospirosis. And key risk, key risk factors include residing in a flooded area, wading or swimming in flood water with or without cuts, contact with animal fluids, especially carcasses, and ingestion of contaminated water. So we then ask, why does rainy season create a perfect storm for leptospirosis transmission and surge? So leptospira in the urine of infected animals are shed, and when there is heavy rainfall and flooding, it contaminates the soil, water, and vegetation with infected urine. Spirochetes can survive for months in a moist environment, and then humans are infected through cuts or abrasions or mucous membranes such as our eyes, our nose, and mouth, coming into contact with contaminated water or soil. So what happens when leptospira enter our bodies? After entering the body, the leptospires rapidly enter the bloodstream, and we call this phase 1 as the leptospiremic phase, wherein the leptospira spread through the blood all throughout our body. And the underlying pathogenic mechanism is extensive vasculitis. So the disease at this time can present as either the mild form, meaning the anicteric form, they don't really present with jaundice, or they present with the severe form, the icteric form, or even progress to whale syndrome, which we will later discuss, which has, of course, a higher mortality rate. So these patients present with abrupt fever, they present with headache, severe myalgia, and this usually it occurs about a week. After a week, the pathogenesis of leptospirosis progresses to phase 2, or we call this the immune phase, wherein we can already see IgM antibodies in the blood. This is important since later on in our diagnostics, usually this is the time wherein the patients become positive for IgM antibodies in their blood. So when the body cannot contain the infection, leptospirosis progresses to a more severe form, presenting as meningitis, uveitis, and in severe cases, renal and hepatic failure, and even pulmonary hemorrhage. At this time, also, leptospires persist in the kidneys and are shed in the urine. So initially, they are cultured from the blood, and later on, second week onwards, they are cultured from the urine. So initially, the IgM antibodies during the first week of infection is actually negative when we try to request it, but after a week, it becomes positive already. So if patients come in 7 days fever, 8 days fever, then it's best to request IgM since at this time it will become positive already. So, since leptospira spread in the bloodstream, almost all organ systems are involved. So, the lungs, the most common and dangerous pulmonary complications are pulmonary hemorrhage, and we call it acute respiratory distress syndrome or ARDS, which are consistent with as consistent associated with higher mortality. Next is cardiovascular. They may present with myocarditis. Vasculitis leads to capillary leakage and hypotension, and patients do present with arrhythmias. They present with heart failure or even shock. Next is the kidney. So they present with renal complications, and the complications range from some patients present only with mild proteinuria or even to severe forms of anuric acute renal failure, meaning they don't urinate at all. Their urine output approaches to 30 cc or even less every hour. And it also presents with initially with non-oliguric renal failure, meaning they can still urinate initially, but they present with electrolyte changes such as low potassium. And later on, if they become anuric, meaning no urine output, they present with hyperkalemia, elevated potassium already in the blood. Some also have hepatic involvement, presenting with jaundice. So you can see yellowing of the skin, icteria of the eyes, and we try to check under the tongue. They develop yellowish tongue on submucosal area, and they also present with elevated transaminases and elevated bilirubins. Some also present with um, Whale syndrome, which presents with renal and hepatic function, pulmonary hemorrhage, vascular collapse, and alteration in consciousness, meaning they present with decrease in sensorium. So they become sleepy, lethargic when you see these types of patients. And um, there's what we call the triad of Whale syndrome. First is renal dysfunction, second is hemorrhage, and next is jaundice. And the case fatality ratio or the CFR increases to 5 to 15%. So this is from the DOH and Harrison's Internal Medicine, Principles of Internal Medicine. Okay. So in this picture, this is a sample of alveolar hemorrhage in leptospirosis case. So we should expect that there should be lucency, meaning they should be black in between the rib rib cage. However, in these patients, since the alveoli already has blood. So it presents with fluffy infiltrates, bilateral, and this makes the patient really dyspneic. And we tend to intubate these patients. And when we intubate these patients, there are a lot of blood already. So that's what we call pulmonary hemorrhage. And this is very common, no? I've seen maybe, I think, more than 10 cases already of leptospirosis presenting as alveolar hemorrhage or pulmonary hemorrhage. So next part is the clinical presentation and what are the possible differential diagnoses. So local studies show that the most common features are fever, which approaches to about 100% of cases. That's why later on in the DOH criteria, um, we should consider leptospirosis if there's fever. And the second signs and symptom are myalgia or calf tenderness. Patients also present with body malaise, then since liver is also involved. And then patients also present with conjunctival suffusion, which I will show later. They present with headache, abdominal pain, oliguria, meaning there's decreased urine output, jaundice, meaning there's yellowing of skin, and hemoptysis. So how do we suspect leptospirosis cases? So leptospirosis should be suspected in any individual presenting with acute febrile illness of at least 2 days. So yun yung prerequisite. And two or more of the following. So myalgia, calf tenderness, conjunctival suffusion, chills, abdominal pain, headache, jaundice, or oliguria, and of course a risk factor or wading in blood with or without cuts. So this is how to differentiate the two physical examination of the eye. So this is what we call conjunctival suffusion. This is redness without exudate, which is characteristic but not a universal sign. But most of my patients, maybe 9 out of 10, you really have conjunctival suffusion. And in severe cases, they also have jaundice, they have icteria in their sclera, presenting as this one. So, what are possible and close differential diagnoses? So, these are the features: onset, myalgia, rash, hemorrhage, key sign, WBC, and platelets. And um, in this row, we can see the possible differential diagnoses aside from leptospirosis. Close differential would be dengue fever, influenza, and typhoid fever. So, since the initial presentation is often non-specific, influenza-like illness, meaning symptoms may be initially mistaken for viral infections. So take note that typhoid fever, it's usually insidious, meaning it the signs and symptoms present chronically, unlike leptospirosis, dengue fever, and influenza. And usually the myalgia is milder, and the rash for influenza is uncommon. We don't usually see this. And influenza doesn't always present with hemorrhage as well. For the key signs in leptospirosis, again, conjunctival suffusion, the one I showed you, jaundice, or AKI, meaning acute kidney injury, presenting as decreased urine output. While for dengue fever, they usually present with positive tourniquet test, retroorbital pain, and of course, influenza presents with coryza and sore throat. Typhoid fever present with relative bradycardia, meaning um, in most of infections, we usually expect tachycardia since there's systemic inflammation. But in typhoid fever, even if there's systemic infection, like they present with fever, with tachypnea, and you would expect to have tachycardia as well. But we call this the Faggot sign. So they present with relative bradycardia. And usually, some patients really present with gastrointestinal symptoms and present with abdominal pain or tenderness. For the WBC, usually it's normal in leptospirosis or sometimes elevated. While for platelets, leptospirosis and dengue fever, of course, can present as thrombocytopenia. And most of my patients with leptospirosis really present with thrombocytopenia. And it doesn't mean, same with dengue, no, we don't usually transfuse these patients as long as it does not decrease to less than 20,000 or they do not present with active bleeding. So the broad differential diagnosis makes a detailed exposure history, meaning if you see patients at the ER presenting with fever, you should really ask for possible exposure, like contact with flood water, or they live in an area with a lot of rats. And um, this exposure history is absolutely critical for raising suspicion of leptospirosis. So if we now have a clinical suspicion of leptospirosis, how do we then request for the specific laboratories to help us in diagnosing leptospirosis? So again, in this golden rectangular box, clinical diagnosis is key. Treatment should be initiated based on high clinical suspicion, meaning even without laboratories, and should not be delayed for laboratory confirmation. So once the DOH diagnostic criteria is fulfilled, the one I mentioned, this one, we may consider the following laboratory investigations. So zooming into the laboratory investigations, first is culture. So the isolation of leptospires from the body fluid, blood or urine. So blood or CSF in the first week in the leptospiremic phase, the one I showed you a while ago. And after the first week, the leptospira can be cultured in the urine. So this is considered definitive. It's the gold standard for isolation, but the turnaround time can be about 12 weeks. So by that time, the patient is already dead or already recovered. That's why it's gold standard, but we usually don't depend on the results before we manage these patients. Next is the MAT or MAT. This stands for microscopic agglutination test or MAT. This is considered the reference standard for serodiagnosis, and um, definitive diagnosis is established by a fourfold increase in antibody titer when comparing the acute serum and the convalescent serum specimens. So it's usually not that common, but in PGH, we actually have leptomat. So we usually request this, and we pair the samples. So initially, we take the samples at the ER, and then after about a week or two, we repeat the test, and we usually see seroconversion. So usually, it's either negative or low titer. Then the titer increases after a week. So that's also a definitive diagnosis of leptospirosis. Next is PCR. So this is molecular and it can be used to detect leptospiral nucleic acid in blood or urine, providing a definitive diagnosis. So PCR, like all other PCRs, these are highly sensitive and specific for early diagnosis. Compared to culture, PCR results are faster and it detects leptospiral DNA. The fourth one, which is relatively more common and also available locally, we call this IgM or immunoglobulin M, ELISA rapid tests. So this usually becomes positive after 5 to 7 days. No? The one I showed after a week, the immune phase. And this is useful for rapid diagnosis in the early phase of the disease. Okay, next. So for other supportive diagnostics, we request for CBC with platelet. We look for thrombocytopenia, normal or elevated WBC. We also request for BUN and creatinine since, again, patients present with acute kidney injury or oliguria, meaning there's decreased urine output. We can also request for urinalysis, which may show proteinuria or protein in the urine. Normally, it should be negative. We don't see protein in the urine, but with acute kidney injury, if there's damage to the kidneys, we then see protein in the urine. We can also see pyuria and hematuria. And since it also presents with liver injury, sorry, um, it also presents with mild elevation of SGPT and SGOT, and again, leptospiral serology. So these are just other additional workup for leptospirosis. So serum electrolytes of sodium, potassium, bilirubin, total and direct, coagulation studies, and ABGs, especially for those who have dyspnea, pulmonary hemorrhage. And again, we request for chest X-ray, the one I showed you a while ago. And then we also request for ECG since some patients, their dyspnea actually, aside from the pulmonary hemorrhage, they also present with myocarditis affecting the heart. And since there's myocarditis, we can also request for creatinine kinase, which oftenly mark markedly elevates in patients with myositis. So again, early recognition and treatment are critical, and we need not to wait for confirmatory test results before initiating antibiotic therapy. Okay, for the treatment and management protocols, so I divided it into two, so treatment and chemoprophylaxis. So I'd like to emphasize that antibiotic initiation is crucial and very important, and this should be administered as soon as leptospirosis is suspected, regardless of the duration or phase of the disease, to shorten illness duration. So, for example, for treatment, no, we have mild leptospirosis and moderate to severe leptospirosis. So, meaning we also manage patients who have leptospirosis as outpatient if the symptoms are mild. We can just give doxycycline, or alternative would be amoxicillin. And for those who have high grade fever, decreasing urine output, or coughing with hemoptysis, then we admit these patients and manage with penicillin G intravenously every 6 hours. Or in some patients, for example, we cannot rule out concomitant pneumonia or UTI. We give ceftriaxone instead. And for chemoprophylaxis, and this for me is very important, and I think everyone should memorize this since as healthcare workers, the doctors are not only responsible for educating the people about chemoprophylaxis since it can really prevent leptospirosis. So for high-risk occupations or those patients who we expect to be exposed to leptospirosis chronically, they can take doxycycline 200 milligrams orally once weekly. Or for those patients who are not exposed for a long time but has significant exposure, we can give them if low risk, meaning they don't have cuts, they don't have exposure to mucous membranes, we can give doxycycline 200 milligrams single dose. And for high risk, we can give doxycycline 200 milligrams once daily for a longer duration of 3 to 5 days. So recently, I posted in my Facebook page about the dosing of prophylaxis for leptospirosis. This is an infographic from DOH. So please, if you can follow my page, Dr. Benjo Plaza Ato, and you can see all the infographics that I share. And you can also send questions to me via Facebook page, and I'll be happy to answer them during the question and answer later. So if it's low risk, meaning since this is Tagalog, this is from DOH, no? So, ikaw ba ay lumulusong sa baha? Oo, minsan lang. And then may sugat ang parte ng katawan na nababad sa baha? Wala. So, the treatment would be doxycycline, 2 capsules within 72 hours. And then for moderate risk, ikaw ba ay lumusong sa baha? Minsan lang. And may sugat ang parte ng katawan na nababad sa baha. If there is, then that's moderate risk. So this is what I mentioned, that we should give doxycycline for a longer duration of time, like 3 to 5 days, instead of one dose. And for high risk, um, recurrent exposure to leptospirosis, so the patient should take doxycycline once a week. So again, you can follow my page and you can like the posts that I share as well for learning purposes, and you can also share them. Okay, so since leptospirosis can progress to a more complicated case involving the lungs and the kidneys mainly, so the lungs and the kidneys are the two major organs that leptospirosis can affect. So this is how the guidelines suggest how we should manage these patients. So for pulmonary crisis, this is the most feared complication associated with high mortality. So suspect when tachypnea of RR more than 30, dyspnea, cough or hemoptysis appear usually for 4 to 6 days. So we start steroid therapy. We initiate early. Methylprednisolone, 500 milligrams IV daily for 3 days is suggested for patients at high risk. And for ventilatory support, for mild, we do close monitoring and we do non-invasive ventilation. While for moderate to severe, there's ICU admission, invasive mechanical ventilation. We give low tidal volume strategy, and we give ECMO. So these are more very technical stuff, but take note that if the patient has severe case already, then we give steroid therapy already. While for renal failure, the hallmark of severe disease, often initially non-oliguric with hypokalemia, but oliguria is a poor prognostic sign, meaning if the patient develops decreasing urine output, it means that the patient's leptospirosis is already severe. And what are the possible indications for dialysis? So one is severe metabolic acidosis, meaning there's too much acid in the blood. The pH becomes less than 7.2. And then hyperkalemia of more than 6.5, or uremic symptoms. Patients may have decrease in sensorium or volume overload presenting as dyspnea or pulmonary edema. So in these types of patients, we do hemodialysis. So we refer them to nephrologists, and we do daily dialysis to improve survival in severe cases. So what are complications to watch out for? So again, most common would be pulmonary involvement. The second one is renal involvement. So this shows a more detailed management of acute kidney injury depending on the volume status. And this also shows the indications for steroid therapy. So um, for patients who present with pulmonary hemorrhage and or acute kidney injury. So we give methylprednisolone 500 milligrams IV daily for 3 days. For some patients or some references, we actually give 1 gram of methylprednisolone. So this is what we call the high dose steroid. And we give the first dose as a bolus within 12 hours of respiratory involvement onset. So again, hemodialysis is preferred over peritoneal dialysis, and we do daily dialysis to maintain strict control of azotemia and fluid volume. So next is how to approach patients who have life-threatening pulmonary hemorrhage. So when do we say that a patient with leptospirosis have pulmonary hemorrhage? So one is coughing, dyspnea, hypoxemia, tachypnea of 22 or higher, hemoptysis. So if our patients present with these signs and symptoms, we then act immediately and give high dose steroids and, of course, the antibiotics. So we assess severity by requesting for the chest x-ray, arterial blood gas, pulse oximetry, and we base the severity based on the computed PaO2 over FiO2 ratio. So you're the one, the doctors usually compute that one. So if it's more than 200, it's just mild. So we do close monitoring, we give methylprednisolone, and we give antibiotics, and we don't usually intubate these patients. So we give non-invasive ventilation. So I don't know if you're familiar with either the high flow nasal cannula or the BiPAP, no? So we don't intubate them. But for moderate cases, we admit them to ICU, we initiate invasive ventilation, we give antibiotics and methylprednisolone. While for severe cases, we usually do prone positioning, which can be um, tasking for the nurses and the doctors. We can also do ECMO, but usually do this in bigger centers. So when I rotated in NKTI in Manila, so they do usually do ECMO for patients who have severe leptospirosis. And there are also criteria to follow if ECMO is already indicated. So at your right, we can see the indications for intubation, meaning um, for initiating invasive ventilation. So if there's hypoxic respiratory failure, hypercapnic respiratory failure, deterioration of sensorium, meaning if there's lethargy, and failure of non-invasive ventilation, meaning initially we try them with high flow nasal cannula or we do just BiPAP, and upon repeat laboratory or assessment of the doctors, it seems like the patient is not clinically improving, then we can resort to really intubating these patients. While for ECMO, we consider them if we're with severe ARDS despite optimal care. And the best outcome is the best outcome is when this ECMO is instituted early. So the last part, what are the physician's roles in early detection and DOH reporting? So this is the power of early detection, no? So um, high index of suspicion in any patient with acute febrile illness, relevant exposure history, meaning um, as doctors or even as nurses, it's really very important to elicit environmental history aside from taking the usual history of present illness, the past medical history. We should always include environmental history. These are single most important factor in preventing severe disease and mortality. So our clinical judgment initiates the entire cascade of care. So again, early suspicion and treatment leads to recovery, while delayed diagnosis leads to complication. So the mandate to report, and why does it matter? Reporting it's not just administrative, it is essential for outbreak detection, since if we noticed that there are already increasing cases of leptospirosis, then we can inform DOH immediately that there's a possible outbreak of leptospirosis so that resources can be maximized and planning can be initiated immediately. So we can do also resource allocation like activating upsurge policy and public health alerts. So how do we report? According to DOH or the NKTI process, we identify all the suspected and confirmed cases. We do daily census of our patients and we consolidate it every 24 hours. And we usually submit it to the IPCC of the hospital. So all hospitals should have IPCC or Infection Prevention and Control Committee, which then submits the number of cases and the report to DOH and the Philippine Integrated Disease Surveillance and Response or PIDSR system. So again, the accurate and timely reporting directly informs the DOH Epidemiology Bureau, and triggers necessary public health responses, such as, again, resource allocation, activating upsurge policy, and public health alerts. So, what are the key takeaways for this lecture? Again, suspect and act. We should maintain a high index of suspicion if we see patients who have fever, decreasing urine output, jaundice, myalgia, and environmental history, exposure to flood water. And again, do not wait for the complications to occur, such as jaundice or oliguria. Next is use the criteria for high dose steroid pulse therapy. So low platelet, hypotension, lung infiltrates, and chest x-ray that you saw a while ago to identify high-risk patients who need aggressive management and potential steroid therapy early. So treat early and we treat right. So we initiate antibiotics immediately upon suspicion. We give doxycycline for mild cases. We give IV penicillin G or ceftriaxone for moderate to severe cases. So again, the complications are pulmonary hemorrhage in the lungs, acute kidney injury or AKI, and then we monitor urine output and respiratory status vigilantly. Any sign of dyspnea, hemoptysis, or oliguria requires immediate escalation of care. Again, not only doctors but nurses, our role extends beyond the bedside. Accurate and timely DOH reporting is critical for public health surveillance and controlling outbreaks. So we always say that knowledge is power. So my task for everyone, the audience who is listening right now, is again open your Facebook, search for my Facebook page, Dr. Benjo Plaza Ato, and share this infographic that I made in my profile. Share to your profile so that more people will understand how leptospirosis should be recognized as a threat, how we should take action in the treatment and prevention of leptospirosis, what are the common signs and symptoms, and what are the recommended prophylaxis. And for me, this will serve as a commitment to stop leptospirosis transmission and be more aware of how to manage leptospirosis and how to easily recognize that the patient is a suspect for leptospirosis, especially during rainy seasons. So these are my references. Thank you. So that would end my lecture. If you want to ask questions, you can message me in my Facebook page, Dr. Benjo Plaza Ato, or you can email me, bpato@carsu.edu.ph. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for listening.